I was scrolling around on Instagram the other night and found this really cool miniature by Juan Sanz, and it had this really cool ricochet effect, and I really wanted to emulate it. I also had this Russian Soviet style power armor dude that I've had for a while, and I've been struggling to think of ways of using him, and felt this would be the perfect candidate for it. So I scoured that post and looked on the internet and finally found the ricochet effects. They're from a 3D printing website called Deadly Print Studio, if you are curious and want to do this yourself. Not a sponsor, again, I just really like the effects and wanted to use them myself, so I bought them. Once I superglued them in place, I then gave the model a coat of black primer, and gave it a quick little zenithal highlight with some deck tan. And then, being a Russian or Soviet model, I went with the traditional Russian 4BO paint color. For some of the highlights, or the first round of highlights, I used some silver gray and mixed that with the 4BO. And focused this on the raised portion, so I just sprayed it from the top down. For some of the shadows, I went with a mixture between Russian green and dark Russian green, and sprayed this from the bottom up. Once dry, I made an even lighter color for these highlights and focused them again mainly on the raised portions. I'm keeping the paint job pretty simple because I want the ricochet effects and the OSL that goes along with it to really stand out and be the main focus of the piece, or the main focus of the figure. So I'm mainly just trying to get most of it all colored in, so nothing really stands out too crazy and everything feels kind of appropriate. Quickly painting the gun, I just used some black as the base and used lead belcher along with some silver to help just catch those little edges and give the gun a little bit more definition. And then it was on to the OSL and ricochet effects. I just used a pure white and sprayed over all of the ricochet, allowing some of the overspray to spray onto the model, which would give me a clue as to where the OSL should land. At least I think so. This is the first time I've ever tried OSL, and for those of you curious, OSL just simply means object source lighting. Just think of light coming from that ricochet. So from my understanding, I went with what made sense the most, and I applied a fluorescent orangey red to the ricochet as the base coat. And then closer to the center of that ricochet, where the area would be the hottest, I then made a fluorescent yellow ink kind of color, and applied that with an airbrush, but then transitioned to applying it with a brush. This ended up taking a few cycles of applying and drying and applying and drying because, again, yellow is very notorious for its poor coverage. And then in the very center of the ricochet, I applied a off-white color just to show the absolute most intensity of that heat. And then ultimately using a yellow ink to glaze across the entire thing to blend it all together. For the first time doing OSL, I'm pretty happy with it. It's kind of a fun technique. Now our bullet bouncing behemoth needs a building. Sorry for the alliteration, I'll keep it brief. So I threw together a simple little base using some off-cut XPS foam. I don't know where he would be in this kind of situation to be getting shot at like this, so I ended up just going with a warehouse, or the corner of a warehouse, with a window on the side of it, and some large I-beams against the back wall. Again, nothing too fancy, as the figure should be the focal point of the entire piece. It'll also give me an excuse to try out a new technique that I've seen people do in the past and I wanted to try out myself. But before we get to that technique, we need a fresh coat of primer. I wanted to try this peeling paint kind of effect. So for this, I needed to apply the base colors for everything, and I just assumed it would all be concrete. I applied Tamiya deck tan out of an airbrush and applied it in a modeling haphazardly pattern and spilled a good amount of it on the floor. Not really looking for a complete opaque coverage. Once dry, I took a darker gray color, in this case AK's graphite, and made a wash with that and applied it to all of the surfaces. To give some more visual texture, I took a darker gray, a medium gray, and a lighter gray, and stippled them on using a sponge. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect. This is mainly to give a little bit of that texture and variation, so when that peeled paint shows through to the back wall, you can kind of get a little bit more variation and not just see the same colored wall. And then to get that peeling paint effect, you apply a coat of liquid latex over the surface you want that paint to be on. Out of the bottle, it's a whitish yellow color, but it does dry clear. The only issue with working with this is it actually has a lot of ammonia in it, so it smells god-awful. If you know, you know. But once dry, I applied some masking tape on the floor and applied a off-white color to all of the walls I want to be chipped. Going with that Soviet theme, I wanted to have a little blue strip underneath, or the lower portion of that wall, so I used a little bit of that off-white and mixed in a lot of blue to create a paler blue color. And then I removed the masking tape, and for those of you who really enjoy that, we'll have a moment of silence. And welcome back. With everything unmasked, it was then time to start playing with the peeling paint. And for this, you really you do many different ways of getting this paint to peel, quote unquote. And I found using a pair of tweezers to like poke and prod and kind of like break through that little light layer of latex to be kind of useful. I also used a X-Acto blade just to help cut and again manipulate a little bit, but I also found using a gloved hand, in this case like a nitrile glove, it would grip that latex pretty well, and just rubbing my thumb across it got some natural looking results that I was pretty happy with, and I wish I ended up doing it a little bit more, honestly, instead of using the X-Acto blade. Again, there really is no right or wrong way of doing this. Paint peels in such different ways anyways, so it was fun to experiment with, and I really think I'm going to try this again, maybe with some more wall textures. Once I was happy enough with it, I did give it a quick coat of matte varnish just to kind of seal things together. A lot of that paint flakes are pretty loose, so I wanted something to kind of glue it together. And then I moved on to weathering. For the first pass, I used a black ink wash. And then I moved on to some kind of dust and dirt effects, and for this I just used a sandy wash and applied it using some light brush strokes. Really just building up the opacity. Ended up just building it up over several layers just to get that kind of look that I was looking for. I also painted all of the metal bits using the same techniques that I've done before, just using a simple little rusty base coat and applying darker and lighter rust tones with the sponge method. I wanted to add some more stuff to the scene just a little bit, and I wanted to make some wood planks. I'd been watching a lot of Night Shift's videos on making wood using some plastic card, so I just followed his basic steps, took some plastic card, cut out the planks, and then scribed it using a wire brush. I wanted to use some of that wooden planks to help accent the window, so I whipped up a simple little window and then went about painting the wood. And then to paint the wood, I just did the same thing that Night Shift did and created a heavy oil dot filter essentially. Dotted on some woody kind of colors and thinned and blended them together all with some mineral spirits. But a good top tip is make sure you do it off camera so no one can see you, and then make another piece just so you can show people what you mean. And then to finish off the window insert, I just applied a matte varnish over it. It's a good little way of fogging up the glass, making it look like it's a little bit more aged. I felt like this corner needed a little bit of something, so I threw some of those wooden planks into a little rusty barrel. I felt like it needed a little something, so I busted out some weathering powders and dusted the place up a little bit. I then glued the figure in place, and this one was pretty much done. So yeah, that's this piece finished. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like what you saw and you want to see some more, click here. This was a fun little project. I was really happy to test out some OSL, but for the next project, I'm definitely going to go back towards the bigger scale things. In fact, it's sitting right next to me curing a whole bunch of resin. And if you know me, it probably went poorly. Only a little bit poorly. Enough teasing. All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one.